Hi, this is Jenna. The purpose of this video is to focus on the heel construction, so very minimal instruction on the other parts of the sock are included. For my favorite loom knitted socks, any brand, size, or shape of loom will work as long as the loom gauge and yarn weight coincide. I will be using basic loom knitting supplies. I start my sock off with a basic slip knot on peg number 1, then a double E wrap cast on. Once I have cast on, I will do a 1x1 or a 2x2 ribbing for approximately 2 inches. When the cuff is completed, I will knit an additional 3 to 6 inches for the leg section. This could be a plain vanilla stockinette or a complex pattern. The options are endless. Now on to the fun part, shaping the heel. This heel is worked over 2/3 of the number of pegs on your loom, so you will have to do a little math. On this sample, a 40 peg loom, 2/3 is 26 pegs for the heel section. To keep it centered, I will go back 3 and forward 3 when compared to the 20 pegs I will use for the toe. So I will work pegs 38 to 23 for the heel and 1 through 20 for the toe. This type of heel is worked in at least 3 wedges or sections made of short rows. To achieve a more rounded slope, I will decrease every other stitch versus every stitch. I will start off the wedge by knitting normally until I reach the last peg of my 2/3 section. In this case, it will be peg number 23. I will slip the last stitch on the heel section simply by turning and knitting in the opposite direction. Place a marker over the turned stitch and the one next to it to help track the next turning stitch. Continue knitting back to the beginning of the 2/3 heel section. In this case, it will be peg number 38. Once again, I will slip the last stitch and change directions. Knit the next stitch, and then place a marker over those 2 stitches. Now I will continue knitting across until I reach my first marker, where I will slip the last stitch, change directions, knit the next stitch, and then place another marker. These steps will be repeated, knitting back and forth, shortening the rows, until there is approximately 1 inch left in the center. The total number of pairs or sets of stitches will depend on your peg count. For my sample, with a 40 peg loom, I will end up with 6 sets on each side. I will show you just a few more to make sure you understand the process. This is how my loom looks at the end of my short rowing with 6 sets on each side. Now I will begin the process of closing the gaps or holes that result from turning the stitches. Remove a marker and locate the ladder on the outside of a turned stitch. This is always away from the center point. Follow the yarn from the ladder to the stitch that was formed on the prior row. This is the stitch I will pick up and place with the turned stitch. Here is a closer look at the ladder on the outside of the turned stitch and the stitch that you will pick up. Doing this will close that gap. One more time on this side. Find the ladder on the outside of the turned stitch. Follow it to the stitch from the prior row. Pull that stitch up and over onto the peg with the turned stitch. Now I will show you how it looks on the other side. Remove the marker and locate that ladder on the outside away from the center. Follow the yarn from the ladder, locate the prior row stitch, and pull it onto the peg with the turned stitch. Again, a closer look. Remove the marker, the ladder on the outside away from the center, follow the yarn to the prior row stitch, pick that stitch up, and place it with the turned stitch. One more time in action. Now all of those prior row stitches have been picked up. You will have 2 loops on every other peg, except for approximately 1 inch in the center. The working yarn should be in the center. I will knit completely around to incorporate the double stitches and then knit back around to peg 1. So to recap, I will begin knitting, and when there are 2 loops, I will knit both loops over as if they were 1. When I get all of those double loops incorporated into the heel, I will be back at the center point. I will need to knit back to peg 1 to complete this wedge. Once I am back to peg 1, I will repeat the entire process of short rowing back and forth, then picking up the gap stitches and incorporating 2 more times for a total of 3 wedges. For a very high arch, a 4th wedge can be added if desired. This will add in some extra fabric for comfort. This technique can be used in both cuff down and toe up socks. It is done the exact same way either direction. Results are very similar and makes no noticeable change in fit. Once my heel is complete, I will move on to the foot. I use a sock ruler to gauge how many rows to knit for my foot. I begin my decreases when my sock measures approximately 1.5 inches from the end of my toe measurement. If I want to continue a pattern on the instep of the foot, I will make sure to include that on the rows that are knit during the incorporating rounds of the heel. My favorite toe is the German short row toe. For the toe, the number of stitches to short row is figured by dividing half of your stitches into thirds. On my sample, a 40 peg loom, divided in half is 20. 20 divided into thirds is 6.6. I chose to round up to 7, so I will short row 7 on each end of the 20 stitches, leaving 6 in the center. For this technique, decreases are worked by pulling the yarn around the end and across the front of the turning stitch, and then knitting the following stitch. Knit back to peg 1 and turn it, then knit back and forth, turning the stitches just prior to the last turn stitch. Once the 1/3 on each side of the toe have been turned, begin increasing back out simply by knitting a turn stitch and changing directions. Repeat this back and forth until they are all worked back in and you are at peg number 1. I remove the stitches from the loom using stitch holders, transfer them to double pointed needles, and follow standard Kitchener stitch directions to close the toe. My sock is now complete, so I will weave in my ends, repeat the entire process, and enjoy my new socks.